I was staring at the letter in my hand when my phone rang for the third time that morning, and I knew my peaceful Tuesday was about to turn into a complete nightmare. The letter was printed on cream-colored cardstock, with the Pinewood Grove Homeowners Association logo emblazoned across the top in pretentious gold lettering. I had moved into this subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona, 6 months ago, thinking I had finally found a place where I could settle down after years of apartment living. The house was perfect, a 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a decent backyard and a 2-car garage. I had saved for years to afford it, working double shifts as a software engineer at a tech startup downtown. My name is Zachary Richardson. I am 32 years old, and I never imagined that burgundy curtains would become the bane of my existence. The letter stated in no uncertain terms that my window curtains violated HOA aesthetic guidelines. Apparently, the deep burgundy color I had chosen for my front-facing windows was considered too dark and not in keeping with the neighborhood's approved color palette of whites, creams, and light pastels. The letter demanded I replace them within 10 days or face daily fines of $50. I crumpled the letter and tossed it on my kitchen counter, then answered my phone. It was my buddy Marcus from work. "Hey man, you coming to the office today or working remote?" he asked. "Remote. I have to deal with some HOA nonsense," I replied, rubbing my temples. "Oh no, what now?" "I thought you said your HOA was pretty chill when you moved in." "Yeah, well, turns out that was before I met Patricia Cunningham, the HOA president. She apparently has nothing better to do than measure the exact shade of everyone's curtains." Marcus laughed. "Dude, that is insane." "What are you going to do?" "I am going to look up the actual building codes. I did my research before I bought these curtains. Pretty sure they cannot dictate interior window treatments. Good luck with that. Keep me posted." After hanging up, I pulled out my laptop and started digging through the municipal codes for Scottsdale. I had always been thorough, a trait that served me well in my job debugging complex software systems. Now, I was applying that same meticulous attention to HOA regulations and local building codes. It took me about 2 hours of reading through dry legal language, but I finally found what I was looking for. Section 8.402 of the Scottsdale Building Code explicitly stated that homeowners had the right to install window treatments of any color on the interior of their homes, provided they did not pose a fire hazard or contain reflective materials that could cause dangerous glare to passing vehicles. The code was clear, and it superseded any HOA aesthetic guidelines. I felt a surge of satisfaction as I printed out the relevant pages. The HOA could complain all they wanted, but the law was on my side. I decided to write a formal response to Patricia Cunningham, citing the building code and politely declining to change my curtains. That afternoon, I drafted a professional letter explaining my position. I attached copies of the building code sections and hand-delivered it to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the subdivision entrance. A tired-looking woman in her 20s sat at the front desk. "I need to submit this response to Patricia Cunningham," I said, handing her the envelope. She glanced at it and sighed. "Another curtain complaint? You have seen others?" I asked, surprised. "Oh yeah. Mrs. Cunningham has been on a rampage about window treatments for the past month." "You are like the 5th person. Most people just change their curtains, though." "Well, I am not going to. The building code is pretty clear." She gave me a sympathetic smile. "Good luck with that. She does not like being told she is wrong." I left the office feeling confident but also slightly uneasy. Something about the receptionist's warning nagged at me. 2 days later, I received another letter, This one was even more aggressive in tone. Patricia had apparently ignored my citation of the building code entirely and reiterated that I had 8 days remaining to comply or face fines. She added a new threat, stating that continued non-compliance could result in a lien being placed on my property. That was when I got angry. I had been patient and professional, but threatening a lien over curtains was crossing a serious line. I decided it was time to attend the next HOA board meeting and address this in person. The meeting was scheduled for that Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the community center. I showed up 15 minutes early with a folder full of printed building codes, legal precedents, and notes I had prepared. The community center was a modest building with a multi-purpose room that smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner. About 20 other residents were scattered across the folding chairs, most of them looking bored or resigned. Patricia Cunningham sat at a table at the front of the room with 4 other board members. She was exactly what I expected. A woman in her late 40s with an asymmetrical blonde haircut, designer glasses, and an expression that suggested she had just smelled something unpleasant. She wore a beige blazer over a white blouse, and her entire demeanor screamed that she took her volunteer position far too seriously. The meeting started with routine business, approving minutes from the last meeting, discussing landscaping contracts, and reviewing the budget. I sat through 45 minutes of tedious minutiae before we finally reached the open forum section where residents could voice concerns. I stood up, folder in hand. I would like to address the recent complaint about my window curtains. Patricia looked up from her notes, her eyes narrowing. Mr. Richardson, is it? Yes. I received 2 letters stating that my burgundy curtains violate HOA guidelines. I have reviewed the situation thoroughly, and I want to clarify that according to Scottsdale Building Code Section 8.402, homeowners have the right to install interior window treatments in any color they choose. The building code supersedes HOA aesthetic guidelines in this matter. I walked forward and handed copies of the code to Patricia and the other board members. The room was silent as they skimmed through the documents. Patricia set the papers down with deliberate slowness. Mr. Richardson, while I appreciate your research, you seem to be misunderstanding the scope of HOA authority. Our covenants, conditions, and restrictions, which you signed when you purchased your home, give us the right to maintain aesthetic standards throughout the community. This includes visible elements such as window treatments when viewed from the street. But the building code explicitly states that interior window treatments cannot be regulated for color, I countered. That is a state-level regulation. Your CC and Articus cannot override state law. Another board member, an older man with gray hair, leaned forward. We have had HOA attorneys review our guidelines. They are legally sound. Then your attorneys are wrong, I said, keeping my voice level. I am happy to have this reviewed by the city building department if necessary. But I am not changing my curtains, and I will not be paying any fines for something that is legally permitted. Patricia's face flushed slightly. Mr. Richardson, I would strongly advise you to reconsider your position. The HOA has mechanisms to enforce compliance, and we will use them if necessary. Then I guess we will let the courts decide, I replied, returning to my seat. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. I could feel the eyes of other residents on me, some sympathetic, others worried. After the meeting adjourned, a couple of people approached me. An older woman with kind eyes introduced herself as Helen. I just wanted to say good for you. Patricia has been terrorizing this neighborhood for 2 years now. Someone needs to stand up to her. A middle-aged man named Robert nodded. She fined me $300 last year because my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. I ended up paying it because I did not want the hassle, but I always regretted it. You should not have to live in fear of your own HOA, I said. This is supposed to be our community, not her personal fiefdom. As I walked to my car, I noticed Patricia standing by the entrance, talking intensely on her phone. She glanced at me with an expression that could only be described as venomous. I had a sinking feeling that this was far from over. The next morning, I received an email from the HOA with a formal notice of fine. They were charging me $50 per day starting immediately, backdated to the original compliance deadline, which meant they claimed I already owed $400. The email stated that if I did not pay within 30 days, they would place a lien on my property. I forwarded the email to a real estate attorney I found through an online search. Her name was Michelle Morrison, and she had excellent reviews for dealing with HOA disputes. She called me back within 2 hours. Mr. Richardson, I have reviewed the information you sent. You are absolutely correct that the building code protects your right to choose your curtain colors. This is a clear case of HOA overreach, she said, her voice confident and professional. So what do I do? They are already charging me fines. Do not pay them. That would be admitting liability. I am going to send a cease and desist letter to the HOA board, explaining that their fines are unlawful and that any attempt to place a lien will be challenged in court. I will also request that they rescind all fines immediately. How much is this going to cost me? I asked, worried about legal fees. My initial consultation and the cease and desist letter will be $500. If this goes further, we can discuss additional costs. But honestly, most HOAs back down once they get a letter from an attorney. They do not want the liability of a lawsuit. I agreed and paid her retainer. 2 days later, Michelle sent the cease and desist letter via certified mail. I thought that would be the end of it, that Patricia and her board would realize they were on shaky legal ground and drop the issue. I was wrong. Instead of backing down, the HOA doubled down. I received a response from their attorney, a lawyer named Gerald Stevens, who argued that the HOA's CC and Artiques were legally binding and that my curtains constituted a violation regardless of building code. He stated that the HOA would proceed with fines and would pursue a lien if necessary. Michelle was livid when I forwarded her the response. This is ridiculous. Their attorney is either incompetent or deliberately misleading them. Building codes always supersede HOA rules when there is a conflict. This is basic real estate law. So what is our next step? I asked. We file a complaint with the city building department and request a formal ruling. Once we have that in writing, the HOA will have no leg to stand on. We will also prepare to file a lawsuit for harassment and legal fees if they continue. The next few weeks were stressful. I filed the complaint with the Scottsdale Building Department, and they scheduled an inspection and review. In the meantime, the HOA continued to send me weekly notices about accumulating fines. Patricia also started showing up at my house. The first time, I was working in my home office when my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Patricia standing on my porch with a clipboard, her expression stern. "Mr. Richardson, I am here to conduct a property inspection," she announced. "An inspection? For what?" I asked, confused. The HOA has the right to inspect properties to ensure compliance with community standards. I have several items to review. Patricia, you cannot just show up unannounced and demand to inspect my property. That is not how this works. She bristled at my use of her first name. It is Mrs. Cunningham, and yes, I can. It is in the CC and Artiques you signed. I am not letting you in without proper notice and a legitimate reason. Please leave. Her face turned red. You are making this much harder than it needs to be, Mr. Richardson. If you would just change your curtains, all of this would go away. I am not changing my curtains because I do not have to. Now please leave my property before I call the police for trespassing." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and stalked back to her car, a white Mercedes SUV. As she drove away, I noticed she was writing something on her clipboard. Over the next week, I received violation notices for a dozen supposed infractions. My grass was allegedly a quarter-inch too tall. My garbage cans were visible from the street for 15 minutes longer than allowed on trash day. My garden hose was not properly stored. Each violation came with a $25 fine. It was obvious that Patricia was retaliating, trying to bury me in fines and paperwork until I gave in. But I was not the type to back down from bullies, and that was exactly what she was. I documented everything. I took photos with timestamps showing my lawn was at the proper height. I had my neighbor confirm that my trash cans were put away on time. I proved that my garden hose was in the garage, not left out as claimed. For each bogus violation, I sent a formal rebuttal with evidence. Michelle advised me to keep all the documentation. This establishes a pattern of harassment. If we end up in court, this will be very useful. Finally, 6 weeks after I had first received the curtain complaint, I got a letter from the Scottsdale Building Department. A building inspector had reviewed the code, examined my curtains, and issued a formal determination. The letter stated clearly that interior window treatments of any color were permitted under City Building Code, and that HOA restrictions on curtain color were unenforceable. I made 10 copies of the letter and sent one to every HOA board member, their attorney, and delivered one personally to the HOA office. I also sent a letter to all the residents in the subdivision, explaining what had happened and sharing the building department's determination. I wanted everyone to know that Patricia's reign of nitpicking enforcement was based on rules that could not actually be enforced. The response was swift and unexpected. 3 days later, I received a notice that an emergency HOA board meeting had been called. The agenda included a vote of no confidence in Patricia Cunningham. The community center was packed when I arrived. It seemed like half the subdivision had turned out. People were standing along the walls because all the chairs were full. There was an energy in the room, a mixture of anger and anticipation. Patricia sat at the front table alone. The other 4 board members were conspicuously absent, sitting instead among the general residents. That told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to go. A board member named Sandra, a woman in her 60s with silver hair, stood and addressed the room. "We are here tonight because multiple residents have raised serious concerns about the HOA's recent enforcement actions and the direction of our leadership. We have received complaints about selective enforcement, harassment, and the pursuit of legally questionable violations. As board members, we have a fiduciary duty to this community, and we believe that duty has not been upheld." Patricia stood up, her voice shaking with anger. "This is a coup. You are all just upset because I hold people accountable to the standards we all agreed to. Standards that maintain our property values and the character of this community." Helen, the older woman who had spoken to me after my first meeting, stood up from the audience. "Patricia, you fined my neighbor because her roses were pink instead of red. You tried to force another neighbor to cut down a tree that was legally protected. And you have wasted HOA money pursuing a vendetta against Mr. Richardson over curtains that are perfectly legal. This is not about maintaining standards. This is about control." The room erupted in agreement. Person after person stood up with stories of Patricia's overreach. A young couple talked about being fined because their daughter's birthday decorations stayed up for 3 days instead of 2. An elderly man described being threatened with fines because he used a wheelchair ramp that Patricia claimed was not aesthetically approved, even though it was medically necessary. I listened in growing disbelief. I had thought my situation was bad, but it was clear that Patricia had been terrorizing the entire neighborhood for years. People had been too afraid or too tired to fight back, simply paying fines and complying with increasingly absurd demands. Finally, Robert, the man who had told me about his mailbox fine, stood up. "I move that we vote for the immediate removal of Patricia Cunningham as HOA president and as a board member, effective immediately." "I second that motion," Sandra said quickly. The vote was called. Of the approximately 60 residents present, 57 voted in favor of removal. Only 3 voted against, including Patricia herself and 2 of her friends. Patricia's face went through several shades of red before settling on a pale, shocked white. "You cannot do this. I have done nothing but try to protect this community. You are all making a huge mistake." "The vote is final," Sandra said firmly. "Please turn over all HOA documents, keys, and access credentials by the end of the week." Patricia gathered her things and left without another word. The room felt lighter somehow, as if an oppressive weight had been lifted. After the meeting, several residents came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. "You gave us the courage to speak up," one woman told me. "We should have done this years ago." I went home that night feeling exhausted but vindicated. I thought that was the end of the story, that Patricia would slink away and I could finally enjoy my home in peace. But 2 weeks later, things took a darker turn. I came home from work on a Wednesday evening to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart started pounding as I approached carefully. I knew I had locked it that morning. I always locked it. I pushed the door open slowly, half expecting to find a burglar inside. Instead, I found something much stranger. My living room had been ransacked, but nothing appeared to be stolen. My TV was still on the wall, my laptop was sitting on the coffee table, and my wallet was where I had left it on the kitchen counter. But drawers had been pulled open, cushions were thrown around, and papers were scattered everywhere. I called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes, a young female officer named Daniels and her older male partner, Officer Torres. "Anything missing?" Officer Daniels asked as she surveyed the damage. "Not that I can tell. That is what is weird. If this was a burglary, why would they leave all the valuable stuff?" Officer Torres was examining the door lock. "No signs of forced entry. Do you have any idea who might have had access to your house?" I thought about it. "I have not given anyone a spare key except my parents, and they live in California. Wait, the HOA office has a master key for emergencies. They are supposed to log any entry, but I do not know if they actually do." "HOA," Officer Daniels looked up. "Have you had any disputes with your homeowners association?" I spent the next 20 minutes explaining the entire Curtin saga, Patricia's removal from the board, and all the harassment leading up to it. The officers exchanged glances. "Mr. Richardson, I think you should check if anything specific is missing, particularly documents or personal information." Officer Torres said. "That is when it hit me. I went to my home office and checked the filing cabinet where I kept important papers. The folder containing all my HOA correspondence, my copies of the building code, and my documentation of Patricia's harassment was gone. Nothing else in the cabinet had been touched, just that one folder. It was here. I had everything documented, all the violation notices, my rebuttals, photos, everything. Someone took just that folder." Officer Daniels started taking notes more seriously. "This changes things. This was not random. Someone was looking for something specific. The police dusted for fingerprints and took a full report. They said they would investigate, but warned me that without more evidence, it would be difficult to prove who had done it. After they left, I sat in my living room feeling violated and angry. I knew it was Patricia. It had to be. She was the only one with both motive and potential access. But knowing and proving were two different things. I called Michelle the next morning. Someone broke into my house and stole all my HOA documentation. Are you serious? Did you file a police report? Yes, they are investigating. Michelle, I am sure it was Patricia. She is the only one who would want those documents. That is a serious accusation. Do you have any proof? No, but who else would it be? She had access to the HOA master key, and those documents would have been useful if she tried to sue me or the HOA. Michelle was quiet for a moment. Here is what we are going to do. First, you need to change your locks immediately. Second, install security cameras inside and outside your house. Third, I am going to request all HOA master key logs from the current board to see if there is any record of access to your property. If Patricia used the master key, there should be a record. I followed her advice. I had new locks installed that afternoon and set up a comprehensive security camera system by the end of the week. The cameras covered every entrance to my house and had motion detection with cloud backup. Meanwhile, Michelle contacted Sandra and the new HOA board. They were cooperative and immediately handed over the master key logs. The records showed that 2 days before my break-in, Patricia had checked out the master key set, claiming she needed to inspect a property for a water leak. But there was no corresponding work order or property address noted, which was a violation of HOA procedure. The police were interested in this information. They went to Patricia's house to question her. I was not there, but Officer Daniels called me later to fill me in. We spoke with Mrs. Cunningham. She denies entering your property and says she used the master key to check a unit on the other side of the subdivision. She got defensive when we pressed her for details and told us to leave. So that is it. She just gets away with it. I was frustrated. Not necessarily. We are building a case, but we need more evidence. Keep your cameras running and let us know if anything else happens. I did not have to wait long. 4 days later, my security system alerted me at 2 in the morning. I checked the app on my phone and saw a figure in dark clothing approaching my front door. The motion-activated floodlights came on, and I got a clear view of the person's face. It was Patricia. She was trying to use a key in my new lock, clearly not realizing I had changed them. When the key did not work, she looked up directly at the camera, her face frozen in an expression of shock and anger. I immediately called 911 while watching her retreat quickly to a car parked down the street. The police arrived within 10 minutes, but she was already gone. However, I had crystal-clear video footage of her attempting to enter my property at 2 in the morning with a key, which was definitely not her property to use anymore since she was no longer on the HOA board and had no legitimate reason to access my home. Officer Daniels watched the footage and nodded with satisfaction. This is good. This is very good. Combined with the master key log and the previous break-in, we have enough for charges. What kind of charges? I asked. Attempted burglary at minimum, possibly the earlier burglary as well if we can tie her to it definitively. We will also look at stalking and harassment charges given the pattern of behavior. The next day, police arrested Patricia at her home. According to the news report I saw later, they also executed a search warrant and found my stolen folder of documents in her home office, along with detailed notes about other residents she considered troublesome. Apparently, I was not her only target, just her most recent one. The arrest sent shockwaves through Pinewood Grove. The story made the local news, complete with footage from my security camera showing Patricia trying to break into my house. The reporters loved the angle about the HOA president arrested for burglarizing a resident over a curtain dispute. Patricia was charged with burglary, attempted burglary, theft, and stalking. Her attorney tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, but the evidence was overwhelming. The video footage, the stolen documents found in her possession, the master key logs, and the pattern of harassment all added up to a clear case. Michelle filed a civil lawsuit on my behalf for harassment, illegal entry, theft, and emotional distress. The HOA's insurance company settled quickly, not wanting the liability of going to trial. I received a substantial settlement that more than covered my legal fees, my security system, my new locks, and compensated me for the months of stress Patricia had put me through. The criminal case took longer. Patricia initially pleaded not guilty, but eventually accepted a plea deal. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail, followed by 2 years of probation. The judge was particularly harsh in his sentencing remarks, noting that Patricia had abused a position of trust and had engaged in a sustained campaign of harassment against multiple residents. Homeowners associations are meant to serve communities, not terrorize them, the judge said. Your actions were vindictive, illegal, and showed a complete disregard for the rights and privacy of your neighbors. This court will not tolerate such abuse of authority. Throughout all of this, the new HOA board worked to repair the damage Patricia had caused. Sandra was elected as the new president, and one of her first acts was to review and revise the HOA's enforcement policies. They established clear guidelines for violations, created an appeals process, and limited the president's authority to act unilaterally. They also formally rescinded all of Patricia's questionable fines and sent letters to residents informing them of their rights under local building codes. Several residents who had paid unjust fines received refunds from the HOA. The story gained traction on social media and local news outlets, sparking a broader conversation about HOA overreach and homeowner rights. I gave several interviews, always emphasizing that the issue was not just about my curtains, but about the principle that HOAs should serve their communities, not rule them like petty dictatorships. A state legislator even contacted me, saying she was drafting legislation to create better oversight of HOAs and establish clearer boundaries on their enforcement powers. She invited me to testify when the bill came up for committee hearings, and I gladly agreed. As the months passed and things finally settled down, I found myself actually enjoying my home for the first time since moving in. The neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow. People smiled and waved when I walked my dog. There were no more threatening letters in my mailbox, no more surprise inspections. No more constant low-level anxiety about whether some minor aspect of my property would trigger a fine. My burgundy curtains still hung in my front windows, looking as rich and beautiful as the day I had installed them. Every time I looked at them, I felt a mix of pride and relief. They had become a symbol of something larger than just window treatments. They represented the right to enjoy your own home without fear, the importance of standing up against unreasonable authority, and the power of community when people come together against injustice. Helen stopped by one afternoon with homemade cookies to thank me. You know, I have lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. The last 5 were miserable because of Patricia. I was actually thinking about selling and moving just to get away from the constant stress. But now it feels like home again. I am just glad it is over, I told her. though I never expected buying curtains would lead to criminal charges and statewide legislation. She laughed. That is the thing about standing up for what is right. You never know where it will lead, but it always matters. Robert organized a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate the new HOA board and what he jokingly called the liberation of Pinewood Grove. Nearly every resident showed up, and the atmosphere was festive and warm. Kids played on the community center lawn while adults grilled burgers and shared stories about their own experiences with Patricia's reign of terror. Sandra gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition and promising that the new board would focus on serving the community, not controlling it. She received a standing ovation. At one point during the barbecue, a younger couple who had just moved into the subdivision approached me. The wife looked nervous. "Are you Zachary Richardson, the curtain guy?" she asked. I laughed. "Yeah, that is me. We just wanted to say thank you." When we were looking at houses, we almost did not buy in an HOA community because we heard so many horror stories. But our realtor told us about what happened here and how the community came together to fix things. It actually made us more confident about buying here, knowing that residents have rights and are willing to stand up for them. That conversation stuck with me. One person's stand against unreasonable authority had not only improved conditions for current residents, but had actually made the community more attractive to new families. It was a ripple effect I had never anticipated. The criminal trial for Patricia wrapped up in early spring. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the courtroom gallery as she stood before the judge. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The confident, commanding presence she had projected as HOA president was gone, replaced by someone who seemed tired and defeated. Her attorney made an impassioned plea for leniency, arguing that Patricia had never intended to harm anyone and had simply been overzealous in her duties. The prosecutor countered by detailing the extensive evidence of harassment, illegal entry, and theft, emphasizing that Patricia had violated the trust of an entire community. When given the chance to speak, Patricia offered a brief apology. "I never meant for things to go this far. I thought I was helping the community by maintaining standards. I realize now that I crossed lines I should not have crossed." It felt hollow to me, more about avoiding jail time than genuine remorse. But the judge seemed to consider her words carefully before issuing his sentence. In addition to the jail time and probation, Patricia was ordered to pay restitution to me and several other residents she had illegally fined. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of closure. Justice had been served, not just for me but for everyone Patricia had harassed over the years. The system had worked slowly and imperfectly, but it had worked. Michelle and I celebrated with lunch at a downtown restaurant. "You should be proud," she told me. "A lot of people would have just changed the curtains and moved on. You stood your ground and you made a real difference." "I just did not want to be pushed around in my own home," I said. "But yeah, I am glad it turned out the way it did." "Have you thought about getting involved with the HOA board yourself? They could use someone with your principles." I considered it. "Maybe eventually. Right now, I just want to enjoy living without drama for a while." Over the following months, I watched as the changes in Pinewood Grove took root. The new board focused on actual community building rather than enforcement. They organized monthly social events, established a neighborhood watch program, and created an online forum where residents could communicate and share concerns. Violation notices became rare and were issued only for legitimate safety or maintenance issues, not aesthetic nitpicking. The appeals process was transparent and fair. People started taking more pride in their homes, not because they feared fines, but because they felt like part of a community worth caring about. The state legislation that had been inspired partly by my case made its way through committee hearings. I testified alongside other homeowners who had experienced HOA abuse, sharing our stories with lawmakers. The bill ultimately passed, establishing new requirements for HOA transparency, limiting fine amounts, creating mandatory dispute resolution processes, and giving homeowners greater recourse against unfair enforcement. The governor signed it into law on a sunny Tuesday morning, and I was invited to attend the signing ceremony. Standing in the Capitol building, watching the governor put pen to paper, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. My battle over burgundy curtains had contributed to meaningful legal reform that would protect homeowners across the entire state. A journalist from the Arizona Republic interviewed me after the signing. "How does it feel to know that your curtain dispute led to statewide legislation?" she asked. "Honestly, it is surreal. When I bought those curtains, I just thought they looked nice. I never imagined they would become the center of a legal battle that would change state law. But I think that is the power of standing up for your rights, even over something that seems small. Principles matter, whether it is about curtains or something bigger." The article ran the next day with a photo of me standing in front of my house, my burgundy curtains visible in the windows behind me. The headline read, "The Curtains That Changed Arizona HOA Law." My parents called from California after seeing the article online. My mom was both proud and exasperated. "Zachary, only you could turn home decorating into a legislative battle." "I really did not intend for it to go that far," I protested. "I know, honey. But I am proud of you for standing up for yourself. Your father and I raised you to not back down from bullies, even when they come with clipboards and official letterhead." Work became interesting too. My company's HR department asked me to give a presentation on conflict resolution and standing up for your rights in professional settings, using my HOA experience as a case study. It was strange being asked to talk about curtains and homeowner associations at a tech company, but apparently my story had resonated with a lot of people who felt powerless in various situations. Marcus, my friend from work, joked that I should write a book. "Dude, you could call it 50 Shades of Burgundy, How Curtains Brought Down an HOA Tyrant." "That is a terrible title," I laughed. "And I am not sure anyone wants to read a whole book about HOA disputes." "Are you kidding? People love underdog stories. Plus, it has everything: conflict, legal drama, a villain getting arrested. It is like a true crime story but about suburban life." He had a point, but I was not ready to relive the whole experience by writing a book about it. I was content to move forward with my life, finally able to enjoy my home in peace. Summer arrived, and Pinewood Grove transformed into exactly the kind of community I had hoped for when I bought my house. Kids played in the streets on warm evenings, neighbors chatted over fences, and the community pool was always full of families on weekends. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, a stark contrast to the tense, rule-obsessed environment Patricia had created. I started dating someone I met at one of the neighborhood barbecues. Her name was Maria, and she lived a few streets over with her rescue dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit. She had moved in just after Patricia's removal and had no idea about the curtain wars until our third date when I finally told her the story. "Wait, you are the curtain guy," she said, laughing. "I heard about that, but I did not realize it was you. That is hilarious." It was less hilarious at the time, I admitted. But yeah, I am apparently famous for interior decorating disputes now. Well, for what it is worth, your curtains are very nice. Burgundy is a great color. Thank you, that is what I have been saying. As fall approached and I marked a full year in my house, I reflected on the wild journey the past months had been. I had bought a home expecting peace and stability, and instead, I had gotten legal battles, break-ins, arrests, and legislative reform. It was not what I had planned, but I would not change how things turned out. My house felt truly like home now, not just because of the physical space, but because I had fought for my right to live in it on my own terms. The burgundy curtains were more than just window treatments. They were a daily reminder that standing up for yourself matters, that communities are stronger when people refuse to accept unjust authority, and that sometimes the smallest things can spark the biggest changes. Sandra and the HOA board had settled into a good rhythm, governing with transparency and common sense. The monthly board meetings were actually productive now, focusing on real issues like street maintenance, community safety, and organizing events rather than measuring grass heights and inspecting curtain colors. At one particularly memorable meeting, someone suggested creating an HOA horror stories archive, documenting Patricia's worst enforcement actions so that future residents would understand why the current policies existed and why they mattered. The motion passed unanimously, and I contributed my entire collection of letters, fines, and documentation to the archive. It became a cautionary tale about what happens when HOAs lose sight of their purpose. Life settled into a comfortable routine. I worked my remote shifts, went on dates with Maria, attended the occasional HOA meeting, and enjoyed my home without fear of finding violation notices on my door. It was ordinary in the best possible way. One evening in late October, I was sitting on my front porch with Maria, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Biscuit was sprawled at our feet, contentedly chewing a toy. You ever think about what would have happened if you had just changed the curtains? Maria asked. Sometimes, my life would definitely have been less complicated, but Patricia would still be terrorizing everyone and nothing would have changed. Plus, I really like my curtains, she laughed. Fair enough. I am glad you are stubborn. Principled, I corrected. The word you are looking for is principled. Sure, we will go with that. As darkness fell and we moved inside, I glanced back at my front windows. The burgundy curtains glowed warmly in the lamplight, rich and beautiful. They had been worth every moment of struggle, every legal fee, every stressful confrontation. Not because they were particularly special curtains, but because they represented something fundamental, the right to feel at home in your own house. The holidays came and went. The new year arrived. Pinewood Grove continued to thrive under sensible leadership. Patricia finished her jail sentence and moved out of state, according to neighborhood gossip. I heard she relocated to Nevada and was working at a real estate office, definitely not in any HOA leadership position. In March, the state legislators hosted a homeowner rights forum, and I was invited as a keynote speaker. Standing at the podium, looking out at a room full of homeowners who had their own HOA horror stories, I shared my experience and the lessons I had learned. The thing about HOAs is that they are not inherently bad, I explained. They serve important functions, maintaining common areas, protecting property values, and creating standards that benefit everyone. But they are also made up of people, and people can abuse power. The key is accountability, transparency, and always remembering that HOAs exist to serve homeowners, not control them. The speech was well received, and afterward, several people approached me with their own stories. A veteran who had been fined for flying an American flag. A single mother threatened with foreclosure over unpaid fines for minor infractions. An elderly couple whose HOA had tried to ban their medical equipment because it was visible from the street. Each story reinforced what I already knew. Patricia was not unique. Across the country, there were HOA board members just like her, drunk on petty power and making their neighbors' lives miserable. But there were also communities fighting back, demanding better, and creating change. I exchanged contact information with several of the attendees, and we formed an informal network of HOA reform advocates. We shared legal resources, success stories, and strategies for pushing back against overreach. It became a support system for people dealing with situations like I had faced. By summer, my story had been featured in several national publications and even a segment on a consumer protection TV show. The producer interviewed me in front of my house, making sure to get shots of the famous burgundy curtains. The segment aired during prime time and reached millions of viewers. The response was overwhelming. I received hundreds of emails from people thanking me for standing up to my HOA, sharing their own experiences, and asking for advice. I tried to respond to as many as possible, always emphasizing the importance of knowing your rights, documenting everything, and not being afraid to seek legal help when necessary. My relationship with Maria deepened, and by fall, we were talking about moving in together. She suggested I move into her place, but I was attached to my house now. It had been the site of so much struggle, but it was mine, and I had earned the right to live in it peacefully. "What if I move in here?" Maria suggested. "I mean, if you are open to it. My place is smaller anyway, and honestly, your curtains are nicer." I laughed. "Those curtains really are the gift that keeps on giving." She moved in just after Thanksgiving, bringing biscuit and her own furniture. We redecorated together, choosing new paint colors, buying rugs, and turning the spare bedroom into a home office for her. Every decision was made freely, without fear of HOA complaints or violation notices. It felt liberating. The second anniversary of my curtain purchase arrived in December. Sandra and the HOA board, with a sense of humor about the whole thing, declared it Curtain Appreciation Day and encouraged residents to decorate their windows however they wanted. It was a tongue-in-cheek celebration, but it represented something real: the community's commitment to reasonable governance and respect for individual choice. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that my battle with Patricia had given me more than just the right to keep my burgundy curtains. It had taught me about resilience, the importance of standing up for principles, and the power of community solidarity. It had connected me with neighbors who became friends, with advocates fighting similar battles across the state, and with Maria, who appreciated my stubbornness, even when it complicated life. Most importantly, it had transformed Pinewood Grove from a place where people lived in fear of their HOA into an actual community where neighbors supported each other, and governance served the people rather than controlling them. On a cold evening in late December, Maria and I hosted a holiday party. Our house was full of neighbors, friends, and even a few of the people I had met through the HOA Reform Network. The burgundy curtains framed windows decorated with tasteful white lights, and inside, people laughed and shared stories over mulled wine and cookies. Sandra pulled me aside at one point. "You know, I have been thinking about writing a case study about what happened here, using it as a model for other HOAs trying to reform. Would you be okay with that?" "Absolutely. If our experience can help other communities, that is great. It is remarkable what you started, Zachary." One person refusing to back down over something small created a ripple that changed an entire community and inspired legislative reform. That matters. As the party wound down and guests started leaving, I stood at my front door saying goodbye to everyone. Through the open door, I could see my living room with its burgundy curtains, warm lamplight, and comfortable furniture. Maria was inside, laughing with Helen about something. Biscuit was curled up on the couch, tired from greeting all the guests. This was home. Not just the building or the neighborhood, but the feeling of safety, community, and freedom to live authentically without fear of petty tyrants with clipboards. I had fought for this, and it was worth every moment. The next morning, I woke up to fresh snow covering Pinewood Grove, a rare occurrence in Scottsdale. Everything looked clean and new, transformed by the white blanket. Maria and I made coffee and stood at the front window, looking out at the peaceful scene. "Beautiful," she said softly. "Yeah," I agreed, though I was not just talking about the snow. My phone buzzed with a message from Michelle. She was forwarding an article from a legal journal analyzing my case and its impact on HOA law. The article concluded that the case represented a significant shift in how courts and legislatures viewed HOA authority and homeowner rights. I read through it, still amazed that my decision to buy burgundy curtains had led to legal precedent and academic analysis. Life was strange sometimes, full of unexpected turns that transformed the mundane into the meaningful. Over the following months, life continued its comfortable rhythm. I worked, spent time with Maria and our dog, participated in community events, and occasionally spoke at HOA reform forums. The story of the burgundy curtains became something I told at parties, a wild chapter in my life that people found entertaining and inspiring in equal measure. Patricia never reached out to apologize beyond her court-mandated statement, and I did not expect her to. Some people never truly understand the harm they cause or take responsibility for their actions. But her absence from Pinewood Grove was its own kind of resolution, allowing the community to heal and rebuild. The final bit of closure came in April when the HOA's insurance company finalized all the refunds for residents who had been unjustly fined during Patricia's tenure. Checks were mailed out with letters of apology, and the board hosted a community meeting to discuss how to prevent similar abuse in the future. New bylaws were adopted, limiting board member terms, requiring regular audits, creating resident oversight committees, and establishing clear procedures for challenging enforcement actions. The changes were comprehensive and thoughtful, designed to prevent any single person from wielding the kind of unchecked power Patricia had abused. I stood at that meeting and listened as residents shared their gratitude for the reforms and their hope for the future. It was a moment of collective healing, a community coming together to acknowledge past harm and commit to doing better. As I drove home that evening, passing houses I now recognized, waving at neighbors I knew by name, I felt profound satisfaction. My home was in a place that felt safe, fair, and genuinely communal. The nightmare of HOA tyranny had been replaced with the dream of what homeowner associations could be when run with common sense and respect. That night, Maria and I sat on the couch together, biscuit between us, watching a movie. The burgundy curtains were drawn against the darkness outside, creating a cozy, private space. In that moment, everything felt right. My journey from a simple curtain purchase to HOA reform advocate had been unexpected, stressful, and occasionally frightening. But it had also been empowering, meaningful, and ultimately successful. I had stood up for my rights, helped change unjust laws, and contributed to building a better community. And through it all, my burgundy curtains hung beautiful and defiant in my windows, a daily reminder that sometimes the smallest stands for principle can create the biggest changes. They were just curtains, pieces of fabric meant to provide privacy and filter light. But they had become symbols of resistance, community solidarity, and the fundamental right to feel at home in your own house. As I settled in for the night, content and comfortable in my home, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not dramatic or flashy, but quiet and satisfying. The right to live peacefully, to make choices about your own space, to be free from arbitrary authority. Simple things that everyone deserved but had to fight for sometimes. The story of the burgundy curtains was over, but its impact would continue. In the reformed policies of Pinewood Grove, in the state legislation protecting homeowner rights, in the network of advocates fighting HOA overreach across the country, and in my own life, forever changed by the decision to stand firm on principle. I would never regret those curtains. They were worth every moment of the battle they provoked, every legal fee they cost, and every stressful confrontation they caused. Because in the end, they represented something more valuable than peace bought through compliance. They represented freedom, dignity, and the courage to say no to unreasonable authority. And that was worth fighting for.